Bonjour.
Good morning, everyone. I will now call this meeting to order.
Resuming meeting number 34 of the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders of the House. Members are appearing in the room and remotely using Zoom. Before we begin, we review a few technical items. Please ensure your devices are on silent mode, as well as refrain from tapping the boom for the protection of our interpreters. As well, select the channel for the official language that you choose to participate in today's meeting with. And if you're appearing virtually, which we do, please click the globe icon at the bottom of your surface. Choose the official language of your choice. If there is an interruption in translation, please get my attention and we will suspend. Those that are appearing virtually have been sound tested and have been approved. As you are all familiar, please wait until I recognize you by name before participating and direct all questions and through I, the chair. I would like to, before we begin, where we stop, welcome 3 new members to the committee. Mr. Wade Chang, welcome. Mr. Nathaniel Erskine-Smith and Emma Harrison. Ms. Emma Harrison, welcome to the committee. I don't see that's the only changes. So with that, as I indicated, the committee suspended on Monday, and the floor was with Madame Fancy. So we will resume the meeting where we left off. Ms. Fancy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good morning through you, Chair. So I believe that, we've had a couple of different days, and there's been ample discussion of the previous motion that we have during committee time. And it seems like we haven't really been able to find a resolution, so I don't want to take any more time up with the committee. And I really suggest that we continue having these discussions amongst colleagues offline. So with all of that being said, Mr. Chair, I would like to move that the committee now proceed to our clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-20. Thank you.
Point of order, Chair.
Motion.
It's regarding the motion, Chair.
Who said that?
I did.
Oh, okay.
Point of order. It's regarding the motion that was moved. Chair, the government's proposing to dispense with the current item on Curum and move to something that was not even on the agenda for this meeting, which is clause by clause. There's a certain level of preparation expected for clause by clause. I think it's more appropriate that clause by clause, if it's going to happen, be on the schedule, not the government in the middle of another item try to dispense with a motion on accountability and proceed straight to something that was never on the meeting notice.
Thank you, Mr. Janis. This is going to debate. We have a dilatory motion, and I'll ask the clerk. Mr. Janis.
It's not. The motion is not in order, Chair.
The motion is in order. It's a dilatory motion.
Okay. Well, I challenge your ruling then.
I'm asking the clerk to call a recording.
I'm challenging your ruling that it's in order.
We have a dilatory motion on the floor, Mr.
And
Janis.
I raised a point of order saying it's not allowed, and I'm challenging your ruling that it is.
You cannot challenge my ruling at this time.
Yes, I can.
Call the recorded vote on the dilatory motion of Ms. Fancy.
You still have to follow the rules, even in a...
Clerk, record a vote.
Madame Koutakis?
Oui.
Not wild.
Madame Desrochers?
Oui.
Mr. Chang?
Oui.
Ms. Fancy?
Yes.
Ms. Harrison?
Yes.
Monsieur Joseph?
Oui.
Ms. Falk?
No.
Mr. Janis?
No.
Ms. Goodrich?
No.
Mr. Reynolds?
No.
Madame Larouche?
No.
Yeas pour 6-6, nays contre 5-5.
That a motion has been adopted. The committee will suspend for a couple of moments while we prepare for clause by clause. Suspend for 2 minutes. Suspend. members, the committee is now in session. Return to session. I would like to provide members of the committee with a few comments on how committees proceed with the clause-by-clause consideration of a bill, which most of you are familiar with. As the name indicates, this is an examination of all the clauses in the order in which they appear in the bill. I will call each clause successively, and each clause is subject to debate and a vote. If there are amendments to the clause in question, I will recognize the member proposing it, who may explain it. Amendments will be considered in the order in which they appear in the package each member received from the clerk. During debate on an amendment, members are permitted to move sub-amendments. Once every clause has been voted on, the committee will vote on the title and the bill itself, and an order to reprint the bill may be required. If amendments are adopted so that the House has a proper copy for use at report stage, yes, it would reflect that. So I thank the members for their attention and wish everyone a productive clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-20. And just before we get to, I would like to recognize who's appearing here. From the Department of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, we have Lindsay Bolt, Director General. Housing Policy Branch, Jean-Sébastien Langelet. Executive Director, Strategic Policy and Integration Sector. From the Department of Justice, we have Linda Sinani. Acting Senior Counsel and Team Leader, Transport and Infrastructure Legal Services. So with that, we will, pursuant to Standing Order 75-1, consideration of clauses 1, short title is postponed until we get to the conclusion. We'll begin with clause 2. Mr. Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask some questions and make some comments about Clause 2, but also just make some comments about the debate we're having on clause by clause of this bill. I do want to encourage members that respect for other members and other parties remains important, even in the context of a majority situation. In previous sessions of this committee, we haven't always agreed, but I think we've been able to work together fairly effectively. We've been productive over the last year, and I'm a bit disappointed by how this meeting is proceeding so far. I don't think it's in accordance with I think the government actually could have gotten to where they wanted to anyways, but it still hasn't proceeded in accordance with the rules. Just to go back in terms of the context, committee had agreed to a study of 4 meetings on Bill C-20, which, 4 meetings, 8 hours of hearings to hear from different witnesses, which arguably is not that long in the context of a bill that seeks to create a 4th housing agency and that is quite long in terms of its text. We spent, I think, about the same amount of time on a private member's bill that was certainly important but much shorter. So I think we were quite reasonable in terms of the number of meetings that we agreed to. We have not completed that number of meetings that was previously agreed to. Formally, in a sense, we had 4 meeting starts that were on the subject, but because of a decision of government members to filibuster, we did not have a chance to complete the 4th hearing. And in spite of the previous agreement not being honored, in spite of not having a meeting notice indicating that there was clause by clause, the government has used their majority to try to proceed directly, and they have proceeded directly to this item. That's not how committees are supposed to operate. That's certainly not a collaborative way in which to get this work done. And I think there's a lot of important discussions to have about housing. we had also agreed to have a study, a further study on housing to commence following this, following the clause by clause on this bill. So our message is that the government has to respect agreements that were made, commitments that were made in the context of this committee, and thinking that you can just kind of blow over that and push these things forward ignores the realities of how committees work, and then also what is actually necessary for them to be productive. So as the official opposition, we're committed to continuing to do our job and asserting that principle as being important for the work of this committee. I also just want to say that, Mr. Chair, the chair is entitled to make rulings, and I may disagree with those rulings. Those rulings can be challenged, and it's not difficult for someone to observe what the likely vote would be on a challenge to the chair anyways in the context of this committee, but it is quite established procedurally that you can raise points of order if you think the rules aren't being followed, that you can challenge decisions of the chair, and for the chair to say you can't challenge me, I think defies logic and normal process. So I guess I'm disappointed that we're here, because I think this committee meeting started, formally this particular committee meeting started 2 meetings ago, and at that time we heard from experts that were testifying before the committee regarding housing. Now, what happened at that meeting is then our colleague from the Bloc put forward a motion that we supported that was about seeking documents from the government related to accountability related to another study. It was a motion that was on notice. We didn't put forward that motion, but we very much supported that pursuit of accountability from the government. The government did not want to hand over those documents, and so they proceeded to filibuster over the course of 3 meetings. And in that context, ironically, the government House leader is sort of making arguments that committees would be more productive, if the Liberals had their way, while they were actively filibustering not just at this committee but multiple committees' requests for documents. And I think these requests for documents are important for committees to be able to do their work. I think part of what motivated that Liberal filibuster was that they felt that the majority was coming, under which conditions they would never have to hand over documents that they didn't want to hand over. Their goal in stacking the deck at these committees is not more collaboration. We were collaborating effectively before, and we were getting things done. And the conditions of a minority parliament forced collaboration. It forced it on all of us. Nobody could get their way exactly. But now the government seems to think that they don't have to collaborate with others, don't have to work with them. And I think most importantly, the outcomes for Canadians will be worse, because when all members of Parliament are working together, and that collaboration can happen in the context of a majority. I hope we might consider going back to that. But we're here debating this clause by clause now, because instead of making counter proposals or amendments or trying to kind of work out a compromise on the request for information regarding Curum software, the government dug in their heels, filibustered over the course of 3 meetings, and then has now promptly used their majority to shut down those requests for accountability. So Canadians will be worse off because they won't have access to this information about this software. Our deliberations on Bill C-20 have also been undermined by the government's decision to filibuster in a way that blocked the testimony of witnesses, and then we end up in a situation where already we're seeing the government ignoring normal conventions and rules to try to kind of drive over the concerns of the opposition. So this is the context that brings us here in terms of the clause by clause. And yeah.
Mr. Mr. Rocher.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I think we should be getting back to Bill C-20 clause by clause, which is what this meeting is about. Right now, the member is filibustering, and I don't know, like, he could do a town hall for his constituency if he wants to have that kind of messaging. But I think out of respect for the officials that are here and everyone that has prepared, including Ms. Kwan, who's here
Thank you, Mr.
to present her
Rocher.
amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Rocher. I would remind all members, Madame LaRouche, a point of order. Madame LaRouche.
Je veux simplement
I just want to say that I agree with what has just been said. We have seen in many committees a similar example. If we are here at the committee asking for information, that is because the Liberals have not been willing to provide information to the committee at the Public Accounts Committee, for instance. So we had to come here and ask for the information here. But in numerous committees, this has been going on. So I just wanted to add my voice to the comments that have been made. We're just simply here asking for information.
I gave you the floor on the understanding you had a point of order, because if not, I have to return to Mr.
voir, mais ça va, Monsieur le Président. Je vais.
It's okay, Chair. I just wanted to say that I agree with that.
Mr. Janis, and I would remind we are in the meeting is in consideration of Bill C-20 clause by clause.
Yeah, that's clearly the item, and I was providing some context for how we got here, because if you look at the meeting notice, there's no reference to clause by clause, right? There's also no reference to the officials. So I do want to pick up on something Mr. Rocher said and ask the officials, because the officials are here, and somebody clearly told you to be here, even though you weren't officially invited through the meeting notice. So I wonder if I could just ask the officials if they could each share. It's curious, because normally when a witness comes to committee, that witness is invited, that witness is on a meeting notice, and I appreciate your work, and I know you are responsible for working under the direction of ministers, regardless of party, and I appreciate your commitment and professionalism. I guess I would just like to know from the officials, who told you to come here today, and when were you told? Because there's no meeting notice that would have, I assume there was no invitation from the chair, because normally there's the chair invites and schedules witnesses, and those names appear on the meeting notice. So I wonder if our officials could just share how that came about.
Thank you. Ms. Bolt, do you want to comment briefly, and then I'll come to that.
We are definitely closely following the review of this committee, and so it's something we want to make sure that we are ready to be available and to appear as needed.
I appreciate that. That wasn't quite my question, though. Were you
address that? As chair of the committee, it's my responsibility to set the agenda on meetings and to call those. And when I was looking at the schedule today, I could not predetermine how long resumption of debate may go on. So I instructed the clerk to have the witnesses for C-20 on standby and prepared. They were here in Ottawa. So if we didn't get to there, it was not. So it was under my instructions to the clerk to have the witness that would be required to discuss clause by clause for C-20 should we get to C-20, and this is where we're at.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you providing some context for that, just for information. I do understand part of the process. I can ask officials questions, so I've got a few other questions just related to aspects of these definitions. But maybe Ms. Bolt, or if others want to clarify. So it sounds like what the chair is saying is that you received an invitation from the chair to be here, or from the clerk on behalf of the chair, and I'd just like to know when that invitation was issued, when you were told that clause by clause was going to be happening today. Because I know there are a lot of other people, not just officials, but people in civil society and elsewhere who are very concerned about the issues around C-20, and they did not have the courtesy of any heads up that this was happening, and obviously officials get information that the general public doesn't. But I would like to know when that invitation was given. You keep glancing at the chair. It's a simple
Mr.
question.
Janis, you direct questions through I, the chair. Mr.
Okay,
Janis?
through the chair, I'd like to ask the witnesses.
Ms. Bolt?
You know, we did follow the sequencing of the review that the committee was looking to undertake, have, you know, made note of the dates, wanted to ensure if you get to the point where a clause by clause and there is a desire to have departmental officials available to respond, that we would be ready. And so I think on that to say, should there be a need to get into the clause by clause and have us participate, you know, we are here if that is the desire of the committee and if that is where you get to today.
I appreciate that, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just asking for simple information because, I'm especially curious now because what you're saying is different from what the chair said. What the chair shared with us is that he had, through the clerk, asked certain witnesses to be on standby. I don't know if he asked the witnesses that we didn't get to hear from at the last meeting because of the government filibuster to be on standby. I don't know if he wants to weigh in on that. If there were others he had on standby related to other things that the committee had actually been doing, especially since formally this is the continuation of a previous meeting. It's not a new meeting. It's a new day, but according to the rules, this is the same meeting that we started a week ago. But the explanation of the chair is that your presence here is the result of an invitation to be on standby, and it sounds like what through the chair, what Ms. Bolt is saying is that officials were following proceedings and making decisions on their own to be present based on guesses about hypothetically how the committee might unfold. So I wonder if you can clarify whether you were invited to be on standby or whether you kind of following these things came to this conclusion on your own. I think the public will want to know this because we're supposed to be accountable. We're supposed to be transparent about the work we're doing. And there was no notice, no meeting notice about the fact clause by clause was happening today. The government knew something. You guys maybe knew something, or maybe you were just here based on a guess about a hypothetical. So could you clarify that through the chair? I wonder if Ms. Bolt could clarify that for us?
There definitely was through parliamentary affairs channels. We, understood that we should be on standby. It aligned with our understanding of the review schedule, and yes, that was also through the clerk. We did receive, receive notice that today may be the timing for the committee to go through the clause by clause.
Okay, thank you. So
Mr. Janis, you direct the questions through me and wait till I address you. For the clarification of the committee, at the March 26th meeting, it was agreed that the committee commence clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-20, an act respecting establishment of Bill Canada Homes on Thursday, April the 30th, 2026. So that was a decision of the committee back then. So I would expect that the witnesses were there, and as I indicated, in my review with the clerk and ensuring the calendar is used appropriately, in my discussion, I said we will prepare for whether the debate continues from where it was suspended for the full hours. If not, what is the option? And the option I chose was to proceed with clause by clause of C-20, but the witnesses required for that are here in Ottawa, and if we didn't get there, it would not be a thing. And so the witnesses before you are the ones that are here for clause by clause, and that's what the meeting is on at the moment. Mr. Janis?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will say, just in response to your comments, very respectfully, that that it is April 30th in the wider world, but it is April 23rd in this room, because this is the continuation of a meeting that began on April 23rd, and so it was agreed that there would be 4 meetings to study clause by clause, and that not on clause by clause, that there would be 4 meetings dealing with the substance in terms of hearing from witnesses with respect to the bill. That fourth meeting, which we are in the middle of now, the meeting of April 23rd, is still going on. The committee did not adjourn. There was a Liberal filibuster to prevent documents from being released. And so I think the fact that government members have unilaterally pursued moving to clause by clause without a meeting notice, without information to the public, without a heads up to the many people across the spectrum of interests who are concerned about this issue, I retain my...
Oui, je n'avais plus de traduction, Monsieur le Président.
Okay.
I don't have interpretation in my earpiece, Mr. Chair.
Is it
Madame LaRouche? Maintenant? Madame? Maintenant? Oui. Mr. Janice?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Ça fonctionne maintenant? It's working now? Okay, all right, great. Je peux continuer en français si...
I can continue in French if you want.
Yes, way. I think that's would be my response to the argument of the chair in that regard. Back through the chair to the witnesses. So thank you for I want to thank you for clarifying that there was an invitation from the chair and the clerk through Parliamentary Affairs. My initial question, and just to follow up on that, was I'd like to know when that invitation was received.
Earlier this week that there could be
Sorry, if you can just start from the beginning because your mic was slow to turn on.
No, all good. We did confirm earlier this week in the department that there was a possibility that the committee was going to be meeting, that they did need to complete the previous meeting, that had not ended, but there was potential that the clause by clause could be covered. So that's where we ensured that we were available this morning, if that's where you go.
Okay, I'm not trying to be difficult here, but you understand that earlier this week provides a pretty broad range. So if I could just re-ask my question, when precisely was that invitation received?
Mr. Janice, I can ask that. I directed the clerk at our meeting on Wednesday to advise the witnesses that would be required from the department on C20. So it would have, I assume, it went sometime yesterday afternoon.
Okay, so the chair is providing a lot of support to the witnesses on fairly simple questions. They're not trick questions.
Excuse me, Mr. Janice. Mr. Janice, please, on order. It is important, and the chair has the responsibility of scheduling meetings, ensuring that time is used. There was, as you pointed out, an extensive discussion at the committee. The committee suspended and was scheduled to resume today where it left off, which it did. And you are skilled in parliamentary procedure, and you knew that the floor would go back to the speaker, and the speaker had the floor at that stage. The speaker moved a motion, which was a dilatory motion, which you understand as well. That motion was adopted by this committee, the majority. Obviously, you did not support that. And so we're pursuing C20, which if the witnesses were not here, then I will not speculate. So when I review the timing with the clerk is to set an agenda that utilizes the time of the committee. Does every committee follow that agenda that's set out? No. But why we're here, and the witnesses that are here were invited by the clerk on my instructions.
Yeah, Chair, thank you for providing that context. I understand what your view is in this regard, and I'm not questioning that is your view, nor your sincerity in holding it. My view is that it is pretty fundamental as a matter of public accountability that when you're doing something as important as a clause by clause on a bill, that is relevant to many people. A lot of people are following the debates on this, whether they agree or disagree, because of the pressing challenge that housing is in this country. But frankly, that's not the point. It could be any bill. I mean, if the committee were to proceed to committee business to discuss some item that was in private, or that was to hear from witnesses that it had already scheduled to hear, I just think for us to have an agreement as a committee around 4 meetings occurring, and then proceeding to clause by clause, and then in what is the middle of the meeting of April 23rd, to proceed to clause by clause. I'm trying to understand how that decision came about and why there wasn't any public communication around it. I think it is not an appropriate way for committees to function, and I also, more fundamentally, don't think it's fair to the public in the context of the input that members of the public would like to have, and I think have a right to have as it relates to housing issues. I also just haven't gotten a simple answer from the witnesses on a simple question. So, Chair, you've
Again,
told the
on
committee.
a clarification point, Mr. Jennings,
Yep.
you have the right as a committee member to ask a question. You do not have the right to dictate what that answer would be from the witness. The witness answered the questions. So if we could keep relevance to what the committee agreed to proceed with, which is clause by clause of C20, that would be helpful.
Yeah, Chair, I guess what you just said is sort of true and sort of not true. Like, I don't have a right to dictate a particular answer, but it is established rules of committees that witnesses have to provide an answer to the questions that are asked. And I mean, I don't want to go here, but like it is the right of committee members to ask questions of those who are here as witnesses, and they have to provide an answer. And this is a matter that has been considered and affirmed by various speakers. So I do think that's an important caveat around the rules. I don't think we're going to get all the way there, but I just want to clarify in terms of the principle of questions and answers, because sometimes things get said that I don't want to create a precedent by when something is said that is maybe could be correct and could be not, depending on how the statement is interpreted. So through the chair, my question to the witnesses is when did you receive the invitation through Parliamentary Affairs to be here this morning?
So it was confirmed yesterday afternoon that we should be prepared, should the meeting go into clause by clause, that we should attend this morning.
You said it was confirmed. That would seem to me to imply that there was a provisional invitation sent earlier, or not? When were you initially invited? Initially told that there was a possibility of or a likelihood of being needed to testify here?
So definitely on the departmental side, we have been looking at the sequencing of the review that was set out, the sequencing that the committee initially set with proposed dates, potential dates. And so as confirmed yesterday afternoon, it was through messages with Parliamentary Affairs and the clerk to say that departmental officials should be ready as witnesses if indeed today was when clause by clause was meant to take place.
But, like, very respectfully, you understand that that's not an answer to my question, right? My question wasn't when it was confirmed. My question was, when were you invited?
Mr. Jennings?
Through the chair, my question to the witness.
And you're becoming repetitive now.
But I'm not getting an answer, Chair.
You're getting an answer. It's not. You may not be happy with the answer, but you're getting an answer.
No, I'm not getting an answer.
On C20.
That's right.
Would you bring your comments to the clause by clause of C20?
Yeah. Chair, we are on the item of clause by clause on C20. I am asking the witnesses who are here when they were invited to appear on the clause by clause of C20. That is not only relevant, that is in a way the most relevant thing. That is precisely on the point of how are we here and how did we get onto an item that was not on the agenda. You're right, I have asked the same question over and over again. it's not a matter of not liking the answer. You know, if someone said Tuesday and I would have preferred to get an answer of Wednesday, that's not the issue here. The issue is that I haven't been told when the invitation was issued. I can't really hear what you're saying, Mr. Rocher. You don't have the floor, obviously, but if you want to raise a point of order, you're entitled to do that. But I can't hear what you're saying. So I will ask it one more time, and I won't repeat it again. But I want to underline that it is we have witnesses who are here. Maybe there wasn't time to brief you on the process, but the process is you're supposed to answer the questions. That's a matter of parliamentary privilege that you're supposed to answer the questions that are put to you. And it's a simple question, a factual question.
You were starting to cross a bit of a line with that gets into harassing the witnesses, Mr. Janice.
Mr. Chair.
The witnesses.
Mr. Chair.
Do not interrupt me when I have the floor, Mr. Janice.
You are
Please
making a very serious allegation, Chair. You are accusing me of harassment for asking a very simple question that has not been answered.
Mr. Janice,
you're throwing around words with serious meaning, Chair. Harassment means something. All right?
Mr. Janice, please come back to order.
My question through the chair for the witnesses. When was the invitation issued to be at this committee?
So I think maybe where the disconnect is happening is on the format maybe of the invitation. On this one, it was an email confirmation that the committee would be meeting today. We understood that there would be, it was a continuation of the previous meeting, and we were asked to be ready should there be a desire for witnesses to be invited and called forward. So this was, we appeared today to ensure that if you go into the clause by clause, we are available to support that.
Ms. Bolt, I'm going now to Ms. Goodrich.
I still have the floor, Chair.
Oh, you asked a question. She answered the question.
No. The procedure in clause by clause is that you can ask questions of witnesses. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate your understanding there. Okay. At this point, I'd like to bring to your attention, then, Chair, a question of privilege with respect to the responses to questions.
Do you have a point of order, Mr.
J'invoque le règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, a point of order, Mr. Chair. Well, let's stick to the subject, stay relevant, and continue. Let's ask the witnesses if they feel comfortable.
Point of order. Mr. Janice.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to bring to your attention, Chair, a question of privilege with respect to the responses of witnesses. It is a very well established. I don't have the precedents in front of me. I don't have them memorized, contrary to. But the precedents are obvious and well established. There have been many cases at committees as well as in the House where the failure to provide documents or to answer questions from witnesses has been considered a violation of the privilege of members. Committees are not just spaces for conversation. They have specific powers as creatures of Parliament. The committees have rights to request information, to ask for information, and that is what I have done in this case. I don't know what I understand the limitations of public servants. I understand that they, especially when they come to committee, they are operating very much under the direction that they've been given by ministers, and so they want to stick to constraints that align with their political direction. But that doesn't change the expectation of responses. I also think in the context of privilege that this is, it's not just a question, it's an important question in the context of the work and operations that this committee is supposed to be doing. Because what I'm trying to understand with this question is how we get to a point of the government not announcing, not publicizing their intended schedule, and then surprising the committee with a decision to go to a clause by clause, which has not been announced, and which was not on any meeting notice. So I think the committee has a right to know, and the public has a right to know how we got here, what the government's planning on doing, and to try to explain the lack of accountability that has got us here. So this is why I have asked the questions of the witnesses, and I think the record will show very clearly that they have not been answered. I've simply asked, when was the initial invitation sent? It was not a question about when confirmation was sent. It was about when the initial invitation was sent. I understand that public servants are following the business of this committee as it relates to their files, but it's clear to me that public servants don't just show up at committees thinking they might be asked to appear, that those appearances are the result of invitations that do come through the chair and parliamentary channels. And that's clearly happened, and the witness, for whatever reason, has missed multiple opportunities to answer a simple question of when that invitation was initially issued. So this is, I think, pretty clearly a matter that touches on privilege. And just in the context of privilege, I think I've reviewed some of the committee meetings when I was away, and just to clarify, it's, as the chair has pointed out previously, it is not the chair who rules on matters of privilege. The speaker determines prima facie questions of privilege. The role of the chair is to rule on whether it is a matter touching on privilege. And following the ruling of the chair, if the chair rules that it is a matter touching on privilege, then the committee, then a privilege motion proceeds, and the committee can undertake through that privilege motion to do any number of things. But the initial step is the question of privilege is raised, as I have, and then it's up to the chair to rule on whether it is a matter touching on privilege, and clearly it is. So I look forward to the chair's ruling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jennis. After listening intently, I ruled that I do not view the matter you raise as touching on privilege. I have more things to say on the main subject. Before I do that, I do want to challenge your ruling with respect to the question of privilege. Okay, thank you. It's a dilatory motion. As
Thank you.
you know,
I'm a challenge this time.
I ruled that the matter raised by Mr. Jennis was not touching on privilege, and Mr. Jennis challenged my ruling. Recorded vote. No, we're in a vote, Madame LaRoche. We're in a recorded vote on a challenge to the chair. The committee votes on the ruling. I ruled that Mr. Jennis raised the point or challenged that the point he was raising was touching on privilege, and that I should rule on it. My ruling was that, as chair, I did not view the matter raised by he was touching on privilege. He then challenged that decision of mine, which is dilatory, goes immediately to a vote. The committee can uphold my ruling that the matter he raised was not touching on privilege, or overturn it. So we're in a recorded vote now, so I'm going immediately to a recorded vote. Do you uphold my ruling or not?
The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Madame Koutakis.
Yes.
Madame Desrochers.
Yes.
Mr. Chang.
Oui.
Ms. Fancy.
Yes.
Madame Harrison.
Yes.
Monsieur Joseph.
Oui.
Ms. Falk. No. Mr. Jennis.
No.
Ms. Goodridge.
No.
Mr. Reynolds.
No.
Madame Larouche.
No.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5, 5.
The ruling of the chair has been upheld, and at this moment, I'm going to suspend for a couple of minutes. Suspend. welcome back, committee members. The committee is back in session, and we are on C20, and Mr. Janice had the floor.
I did have the floor, but there might also be a point of order on the floor, or no? I'll just
That's left.
I'll
If there's a point of order, raise it.
I'll cede the floor then. Is that? But put me on the bottom of the list. But I'll cede the floor.
Oh, good. You'll stay on the bottom then.
Love you too.
But eventually come back to the top.
Well, the bottom comes to the top. What I had, unless I had, okay, here is the hands I see. I had Miss Goodrich from a good while ago. I have Miss Falk, I have Miss DeRoche, and Madame LaRoche. And then, well, he'd have to put his hand up again. Oh, he did? Okay. So, Miss Goodrich, on C20.
Yep, no, I appreciate that, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's worth pointing out, after all of the kerfuffle this morning, we're here to talk about C20 and go to clause by clause. And I understand the Liberals, effectively, they played the cards that they had. They knew they were having their majority and they were going to have full control of committees. And so rather than let us go to a vote on a production order that was very reasonable, brought forward by our Bloc colleague, they ran the clock, they filibustered, they did everything they could so that those documents would never see the light of day. Fair. That was a card that they had to play, and they decided to play it. And the minute they had their full majority and the committees were reshuffled, they decided to break that filibuster, immediately move to this, and clearly a whole bunch of people knew, and so they were prepared so we could go to clause by clause. That's within the rules as were put out. But one of the things, and I've been on committees before, where the chair or the clerk understands that perhaps things are going to change, or the meeting subject is going to be different than what we thought the meeting subject is going to be, which was the case today, because we didn't have a notice of meeting because it was a resumption, because the Liberals had been filibustering for multiple meetings. It would have been nice to have received an email from the clerk stating that you will not be getting a meeting notice for this meeting. We suspect that if the filibuster were to end on this, that we will be moving to clause by clause. It's happened in other committees. I think that would be a reasonable thing to do. And so I would just ask, Mr. Chair, that that's something that we consider doing going forward. In one of our previous meetings in the last few weeks, we actually had a conversation that if the meetings were going to change and the subject was going to change, you were going to actually consult with the vice chairs. I don't believe that necessarily happened here for this meeting. And there is a lot of preparation that goes into doing clause by clause. It's not just something that, as members, we can just show up. It required a whole bunch of work, and when we kind of started to think that this might be happening yesterday, some of the staff ended up working really hard, and I want to commend some of our staff from our team that prepared and stayed up quite late getting amazing work done so that we would be as well prepared as we possibly could. But this didn't have to happen this way. This happened this way because the Liberals decided filibustering until they had their majority was what they were going to do, so that the documents in question would never see the light of day, and that they would just go on and skip whatever witnesses we were supposed to see and go straight to clause by clause. They have their majority, so they can do these things, but it's just not the right thing to do. And so I would just ask that we consider not doing things just because we can, but keeping in mind doing the right thing for the right reasons. And so with that, I will cede the floor, but thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Goodrich. I have Ms. Falk, then Madame DeRoche, then Madame LaRoche.
Thank you very, very much, Chair. I don't think I have much to add at this point in time. So I believe Ms. DeRoche is next on the list. So I'm happy to cede the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Falk. Madame DeRoche, à
Merci.
vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, I think if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion, that the committee proceeds according to the following order of priority, that the committee gives the priority to the participation of the ministers and the secretaries of state, that the committee adopts the second draft of the project on youth unemployment, that the committee undertake a study on project starts in Canada for 4 sessions, and at the same time, a study on homelessness in Canada, which will also be at least 4 sessions.
We have a motion put forward by Madame de Rocher. I'm going to just give a moment for the clerk to circulate that. So we need unanimous consent from the committee to
as well.
Monsieur le Président,
répétez, Madame. Répétez.
est-ce que je peux...
I thought I was on the speaking list. Can I just ask a question before we continue? So before asking my question to Mr. Rocher, once again, we find ourselves in similar circumstances to what happened during the meeting on April 16th. We are in this position this morning because, Mr. Chair, you did not consult the vice chairs. I wanted to give the colleagues an opportunity. On April the 16th, I took the floor. You had decided to make a change on the agenda, and you did not consult us as vice chairs and pushed Bill C-222 to a later date. And I asked you if you would, before making a similar decision to change the agenda of a meeting going forward, if you could consult the vice chairs. And it's in the blues, and you said you would do that formally, that you would consult the vice chairs before making a change on an agenda in a notice of meeting. So I think that is what is causing the frustration. This is from the meeting on April 16th. So this morning, what we are living is, once again, a lack of consultation with the vice chairs. As was said by our Conservative colleagues, a clause by clause simply isn't done without consulting with the vice chair so that people are adequately prepared. So we find ourselves in this situation, and this is the reason. Now that I've made that comment, I'm going to respond to Ms. De Rocher. What ministers, what secretaries of state, just to understand, are you referring to? It is one question I have. And also, why complete the draft report on youth unemployment before project starts? Just looking for clarification.
Yes.
Parle des ministres et des secrétaires.
We are talking about the ministers and the secretaries of state that are relevant. So Minister Robertson and Minister Hajdu. That's it. Do we have unanimous consent to continue so that we can go ahead and...
We need unanimous consent to continue with the motion moved by Madame de Rocher. Yes. Okay. I'll ask Madame de Rocher to read it in English.
Okay. That the committee proceed according to the following order of priority. That the committee prioritize the appearance of ministers and secretaries of state. That the committee adopts the second draft report on youth unemployment. That the committee undertake its study on housing starts in Canada for 4 meetings, and concurrently with a study of no less than 4 meetings on homelessness in Canada.
Do we have unanimous consent? I'm seeing nodding, so we have unanimous consent to adopt the motion of Madame de Rocher. Madame LaRouche, oui? 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 Okay. Thank you. So the motion has been adopted, which clearly outlines where we're going. by unanimous consent, so we'll return to the order of the day, which is consideration of clause by clause. The only, well, I exhausted the speaking list. Yep. But we were, before we got to this, I still had two. I had Madame LaRouche on clause by clause, and I had Mr. Janis.
Clerk, send us out an updated working calendar as soon as possible, reflecting
Based
the
on
changes
this.
that were just unanimously agreed to by the committee members.
Yes?
Thank you.
No problem. It's clear. We don't have to spend any time in committee business next week. It's clear. So yes, Madame LaRouche, do you want on clause by clause C20? You had from my notes, had your hand up from that period. C'est bon?
J'ai dit ce que j'avais à dire, Monsieur le Président.
I already said what I had to say, Mr. Chair. So, but coming back to the issue of the blues, as the chair, you promised that you would consult with the vice chairs, but you did not do it. So that's what I had to say.
Thank you. Anybody else? We're on clause 2 of C20. Mr. Janis and then Madame de Rocher.
Yeah, just briefly to say, Chair, I've been on a lot of different kinds of committees in different situations, and I know committees do their best work when we can operate on a consensus basis. So I'm very happy that we were able to get there. And if this is established as a precedent going forward, I'm more hopeful than I was about what we'll be able to do here, and cautiously optimistic. So I'll leave my comments there and look forward to seeing what happens.
Thank you, Mr. Janis. Madame de Roche.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to thank the colleagues as well for the collaboration this morning.
Colleagues from all parties for the collaborative approach that we've had on this important legislation, Bill C20, Build Canada Home. We may disagree on the how, but we've had important substantive discussions over the last few weeks, and I know that we all share the goal of addressing the housing crisis. I want to thank the officials from Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada for being here and for assisting us with this clause-by-clause reading, and for all the work really over the last few months as you have moved this forward. We've been clear about the work we're doing. There is no single solution for the housing crisis. We heard from witnesses over the last 3 meetings that we do need to think outside the box and take bold action. And this is what we're doing. We're talking about a broad, multi-pronged approach to reaching the goal of building good neighborhoods with homes that people can afford. We're empowering the private sector to build by addressing red tape, taxes, and cost. We're supporting provinces and communities in building housing-enabling infrastructure. And we're also tackling homelessness and supporting the most vulnerable. We're working to increase the stock of affordable housing. And I know this is important for all of us in each of our neighborhood and each of our communities. Just this week in the spring economic update, and also in line of things that we discussed a lot at the committee here, we propose important new measures to ensure that Canada has the skilled workers to build all the homes that we need to build. We're making a major $6 billion investment in skilled trade, and we're helping to create the workforce that our ambitious housing and infrastructure plan is going to require. We're bringing more tool in our toolbox. This new Crown Corporation, Build Canada Home, is going to help deliver on the government's plan to build more homes faster for Canadians who need it the most. And that's going to help all market and non-market as well. The new Crown Corporation is going to help restore affordability, addressing the drastically increasing housing supply of all types to get people off the street and to build houses for the missing middle income. The legislation grants Build Canada Home the ability to provide partners with a flexible mix of financial tools, including grants, low-interest loans, loan guarantees, and equity investment. It'll also give Build Canada Homes the ability to acquire and develop property and build housing on public land. The new approach will allow us to accelerate construction timelines, improve productivity, and support a more innovative home building sector. As a Crown corporation, it'll have oversight, powers, functions, and tools it needs to deliver on its mandate as an affordable housing builder. It is designed to act as a developer, financier, and convener to accelerate the construction of affordable housing. It'll have the operational independence it needs to get shovels in the ground and to crowd in private capital while remaining accountable to Parliament. Maison Canada travaille déjà avec les municipalités.
Build Canada Home already works with the municipalities and the provinces. Many interesting agreements have been announced in the last few weeks and months. For instance, 750 units that we're building in Nunavut to deal with the housing requirements in North. And then in Joliette, there will be housing for women victims of violence. Also recently, we announced 8 affordable housing projects through which more than 1,100 rental units of housing will be built here in the city of Ottawa. The dialogue between the municipalities and provinces continues. We know that we have to work hand in hand together to try to solve this crisis with permitting delays and zoning issues and everything else that touches on the construction of housing. We heard from the minister that many women's shelters will be eligible for funding. There is $1 billion, for instance, that is set aside under Build Canada Homes to support transition homes. Most of the shelters actually operate as support and transition centers. It is clear that if a women's shelter offers these services, they will be eligible for the funding. We also heard that the government is working closely with these circles to identify the needs. So Build Canada Homes will really build a lot of types of different housing, transition housing, social housing, deeply affordable housing, and affordable housing. So it's important that we pass this bill if we want to start tackling the housing crisis. We need to move this legislative measures forward. So thank you everyone around the table for being here and so that we can work together. Thanks.
De Rocher, I have Mr. Aitchison on my speaking list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the dedicated staff for being here. And I have a few questions about the bill, and I guess what I would start with is Clause 2 and the definitions. I don't know if you've been following the testimony of witnesses, but Dr. Carolyn Weitzman was here, and she pointed out that one of the challenges we have in this country is there's a lot of definitions of affordable housing. And I would note that there isn't one in Bill C-20, and yet the purpose of the corporation is, in fact, to get more affordable housing built. And so I'm wondering, really more than anything, if you could sort of comment on that and how it will operate in the absence of its own definition, or what definition it will use, how it will measure that. It's a bit of an open question, but I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Thank you for the question. So I think as you note within the definitions of Bill C-20, there is not a definition of affordability. The idea here was to maintain flexibility, noting that, as we look out, statute, kind of the statute, thinking about it in perpetuity and in the long term, and wanting to make sure as market conditions change, funding changes, partnerships change, we want to make sure that as we think about affordability, and as we think about definitions, that we're maintaining definitions that can be adjusted. The idea being that operationally, Build Canada Homes will establish and has established as part of their investment policy framework that they have published online. They have indicated how they will be defining affordability for the purposes of their investments. In this case, it's housing is considered affordable when it is less than 30% of before tax household income. The idea as well is that that needs to be considered from a regional perspective. Across Canada, affordability is going to look different, and it will look different as well depending on different income bands. And so Build Canada Homes has kind of has operationally been using that definition of affordability as part of its investment decision making.
Thanks for that. So if am I allowed to continue? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Sorry, I don't really know how it works. So then, and so obviously, Build Canada Homes will receive applications for funding or loan guarantees or whatever it might be for different projects. And so on an operating principle, it will use this 30% of income as kind of a general rule, I guess, for adjudicating those applications. And I'm sure there'll be more applications than they have money to spend on. But is that generally how it will work then?
Generally, so when the application comes in and they're looking at the depth of affordability, the type of affordable units that a proposal may be outlining, they would then be looking to apply this definition. They do have a tool that is on the website that is helping proponents when they're submitting as well to hopefully align when that proposal comes in. They've already kind of gone through that process of identifying, the affordability of their proposal, of the units that they're putting forward in their proposal.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got another very specific question, and it may just be my not understanding how the language of this place works. But Clause 20, or 21, I guess it is. Go through my notes here. Yeah, Clause 20 speaks about the powers, and there's a lot of powers. Can buy shares in a company. It can do a loan guarantee. It can do all kinds of really, I think, pretty cool things. And yet, when you go to Clause 21, it says, despite everything that we said in Clause 20, the corporation may provide a loan guarantee only with the Minister of Finance's approval. So what I need to understand about that is, if it is a Crown corporation, it is designed, it already exists. We're making it a Crown corporation. The government wants to make it a Crown corporation for purposes of, I'm assuming, speed and ability to get things done without the painfully slow process that this place is. How will it be able to do that if it has to get approval from the Minister of Finance? He's a pretty busy guy, I would assume. Does he have time to be checking the boxes off of everything that Anna Bylaw brings him?
I think first and foremost, I would say, so yes, the FAA does, the requirement is that the Minister of Finance, when it comes to loan guarantees, the Minister of Finance does need to approve loan guarantees in all cases. Build Canada Homes, there are different processes by which they may use to seek this. There is statutory funding that is identified within this legislation, and so as the organization moves forward to draw down that funding, those are opportunities, those are touch points with the Minister of Finance, and so Build Canada Homes will need to operationally just set up the most efficient process, but this clause in particular does point to the fact that yes, in order to actually issue a loan guarantee, they will need to seek that approval from the Minister of Finance.
Sorry, and if I just want to continue down there just to understand how the place works. When that clause, I see that's a standard clause. I was looking back through the enabling legislation for the Canada Infrastructure Bank, so another example, and they had very similar language in it. I asked Mr. Halucha, I'm like, what is that? He assured me it was very standard language. So that standard language, is that an indication that it's the office of the minister, or is it actually like Francois has to sit down and read these notes and sign off, or is it the office? Is it the ministry, or is it the actual minister? How does that work exactly?
It is an FAA requirement that the Minister of Finance approve.
Okay.
So how that if as I understand, the Minister of Finance will be the one who ultimately is accountable for that decision.
Okay. So I get if that's a standard thing in these things. What specific tools do you see in Bill C-20 in creating a Crown Corporation out of Build Canada Homes? What specific tools will this agency have that couldn't have been given to one of the other Crown corporations? Like I think about Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. It's been around for a long time, and it was created to solve our first big housing crisis in this country, and by all accounts did one hell of a job. It's like its purpose has changed over time depending on the needs of what's going on. What tools will Build Canada Homes be given with this legislation that Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation didn't have?
So Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation has a number of powers already, and so, like you say, in many cases we're pointing to similar tools that CMHC may have available to them. That said, the idea with Build Canada Homes is meant to really distinguish between the mandates and kind of have that focus on affordable housing development, whereby Build Canada Homes would focus in that space to use the tools. CMHC likewise could then focus their efforts, focus their tools on the commercial side of their business, on mortgage loan insurance, on the programs that it's doing to support, in large part, the part of the housing sector, the market housing sector. And so that was the kind of focus moving forward as we delineate between those two organizations.
So that's interesting. Thank you for that. I would note that when the previous government, or the earlier version of the government, came up with the National Housing Strategy, the primary vehicle for delivering on those programs, with the exception of a couple of things that went to your department, was the CMHC. And as the discussion, I guess, continues on what the next iteration of that strategy may be, and this is maybe you don't know, but is it the vision then of the government to take sort of those programs away from Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation because they were overloaded and therefore can focus back on their insurance business, and Build Canada Homes will be the new thing?
So in thinking about some of the national housing strategy programs that relate to the affordable housing space, so CMHC, yes, did deliver Affordable Housing Fund, the Community Housing Development Program, some of the programs that moving forward, so as that funding that funding has been committed, those programs as they wind down, Build Canada Homes will be standing up in that space.
So will there be some clarification for community groups and builders? One of the concerns that I've heard, and again, I think this has been part of the problem. Groups have said, okay, they've tried to apply to CMHC for a program to get something built, and they're told, well, you need to go to Build Canada Homes, and then Build Canada Homes says, well, you should probably go talk to the CMHC. Will there be anything coming forward from the government that very clearly delineates, what type of projects are dealt with at CMHC, what type of projects are dealt with Build Canada Homes, and then I have another question about the Canada Lands Company, what happens next to it, but I'll start with this one if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So Build Canada Homes is ramping up its capacity and its operations. It is working very closely with CMHC to ensure that there is that handoff. CMHC in the programs that I previously mentioned, wanting to ensure that there is that connection that is taking place, and moving forward to ensure, as you pointed out, I know operationally figuring out between Build Canada Homes and CMHC how best to ensure that is communicated out to the sector so that the sector has clarity. That said, the connections will be happening internally as well. There is a desire to ensure that if a proposal comes forward to Build Canada Homes and there are opportunities to leverage to ensure that cooperation is happening with CMHC, that it's not, simply a matter of like batting that ball back out exactly. So that is a piece that as Build Canada Homes ramps up, I know it's a preoccupation to ensure that there is clarity on that and that there is a system by which they are working and kind of having that channel with CMHC.
Okay, thank you for that. If I can just reiterate, I think it's very important as that is worked out that kind of clarity is shared with everybody so that they understand, time is of the essence on these issues, and being bounced back and forth is I think probably frustrating and counterproductive. I'd like to, if you don't mind, jump into the Canada Lands Company, because there seems to be some uncertainty about that Crown Corporation and how it will now, I guess, relate to Build Canada Homes. When we were initially talked about Build Canada Homes, it was the an agency would take federal lands and turn it into housing. And I pointed out that, well, we have one that does that already. And so what will happen to the Canada Lands Company? Is it some kind of a subsidiary of Build Canada Homes now, or is it still a standalone corporation and Build Canada Homes can just take projects that it likes from it and leave it, whatever? I don't know. How will that work?
So, great question. This is where in the legislation, when we talk about the transfer and the reorganization, so wanting to ensure that there are sufficient powers, not only for Build Canada Homes to acquire that real estate and development function, which currently resides in CLCL, but also so that CLCL has the ability to organize itself, make sure that in whatever manner that machinery decision, how it transfers over, there is sufficient flexibility for a number of scenarios to ensure that in moving over the real estate and development functions, that can be done in as seamless a way possible. It also provides the powers so that CLCL is able to also consider their mandate, a more attractions-focused mandate, and how they need to reorganize themselves as an organization once that real estate and development function has transitioned over to Build Canada Homes, really in that desire to kind of maximize, again, moving it from one organization to maximize it with the financing arm, and hopefully have the biggest impact when building affordable housing at scale.
So can I ask then, will Build Canada Homes have the power to just take projects from Canada Lands Company and sort of adopt them and take over those projects?
So if those projects, so like the properties, the assets, the liabilities, the obligations that CLCL has in the space of kind of that mandate that Build Canada Homes is taking on in that, development of affordable housing on public lands. So any of those obligations and assets, that's the piece that, does need to be worked out, and that we do have in the legislation the authorities to ensure that it's organized in such a way. But then, yes, Build Canada Homes would take on and would take over for those projects, for those properties, for those assets, for obligations that CLCL may have on certain properties in those spaces.
So the 6 projects that were announced already and presented as some speeding up of things, those were taken from Canada Lands Company, right? They'd been working on those sites for some time, and so, how were those structured? Did Build Canada Homes just say, okay, we're taking those over now and we're going to finish it, or are they doing some kind of partnership with Canada Lands Company? Are they out, or are they still involved? Is there the balance of the lands are still there? So how did that all come to pass?
No, for sure. So right now, in the special operating agency model that Build Canada Homes is currently operating in, they do have a partnership with CLCL, and CLCL is managing and responsible for those Build Canada Homes direct build projects in the 6 locations across Canada.
I want to be very clear. So they have a partnership. It's a partnership arrangement.
Right now, there is exactly in the September kind of that September announcement that launched Build Canada Homes. There was also a reference to the fact that CLCL would be under the Build Canada Homes portfolio to support the construction on federal lands, in particular as we talk about these 6 direct build sites.
So if CLC is going to be under Build Canada Homes, is this then one Crown Corporation reporting through another Crown Corporation to the government?
Right now, it's a collaboration, and in the legislation itself, you'll see that there are provisions that would allow for that to shift under Build Canada Homes. So Build Canada Homes would be the parent corporation.
Oh, okay. So Canada Lands Company will kind of report to Build Canada Homes.
Could be a subsidiary under.
Okay. So. I'm struggling a bit with that structure. I would suggest that maybe Canadians might struggle with that too. It seems really complex, I guess that's what I'm struggling with, is that Canada Lands Company has been developing on federal lands for some time. I've pointed out that one of their greatest challenges in doing that Number one was getting the lands. I mean, the process to dispose of federal lands is arcane and slow and very difficult, often. And then, of course, once they get through that process, they have to go through the municipal approvals process, which, as we know, is not always the most efficient operation. And then projects in the National Capital Region might then have to go through the same arcane process with the National Capital Commission, which is very secretive, and they wouldn't talk to me and tell me how it works. And so, so you have a Crown Corporation that has developed some experience with developing and building, communities, beautiful residential communities with a mix of affordable and deeply affordable units, and in vibrant communities with some retail and restaurants and that kind of stuff. Some of them right here in the National Capital Region, and they have the expertise they're pretty good at. And some of these projects they've been working on for decades, mostly not because of themselves, but because of the other agencies that they have to deal with. And what I guess I'm wondering now is, what will Build Canada Homes be able to do that Canada Lands Company couldn't do to accelerate that process and get units built faster?
So by bringing it under Build Canada Homes, where you would have the financing aspect as well, you'd have the partnerships that Build Canada Homes is bringing in. The idea is to really leverage the great work that had already been started. On many of these properties, CLC has a bit of a different operating model. And so in this case, you're kind of bringing it into more directly. Build Canada Homes, may make a decision as it relates to kind of the management of their lands. They may make a decision similar to those 6 direct build sites, where it would be very actively involved in the construction of affordable housing on those lands. However, Build Canada Homes would also have the ability to enter into partnerships and to pull partners forward to, bring forward maybe in a joint venture or have a partnership on some of those lands. And likewise, it might just be in offering the expertise that they have, the developer expertise. There's a whole kind of spectrum of ways in which Build Canada Homes may lean in on that developer role.
Thank you. Can you give me an example of a partnership that Build Canada Homes may be able to bring to bear on a project that CLC had started that they wouldn't be able to manifest?
So I think in the conversations that Build Canada Homes will be having with, whether it's in those broader conversations that they're having with communities, with, the city of Ottawa is one of the recent examples where they've kind of brought forward portfolios of properties and talking about the different ways in which bringing land forward, but likewise in bringing the financing to bear as well, that this can just kind of bring forward in a bigger way, trying to get at that scale of affordable housing development and understanding is the kind of right tool for the job. If, again, the bigger goal of saying how do we work towards more affordable housing development in a certain area, is the actual piece to bring forward land, or are there in some of those aspects a desire to talk about financing? So it's bringing in the tools kind of into that same conversation, but a little bit more of a broader toolkit than what CLC has available today.
And what specifically, all right, well, a final question on this one, I promise. I realize I'm monopolizing this, but I am genuinely curious. What's that, sorry?
Informative questions.
Oh, okay. I'm glad everyone's enjoying that. So I keep coming back to this, my point about CLC, which I think is actually a pretty neat organization. Would it, and I'm not, I guess I'm kind of asking you a political question to some degree here, but what I don't understand is why some changes to the legislation, the enabling legislation for Canada Lands Company or the CMHC, but we'll focus on Canada Lands Company, why the government didn't choose to make changes to its mandate and give it more tools and a broader scope instead of taking a year to create literally a 4th federal housing agency, a 3rd federal Crown Corporation for housing. Would it not have been easier just to beef up CLC and give them more teeth or something?
Talk about this for hours because it's where you get to the point of complexity of some of those machinery. I would say that again, the Build Canada Homes mandate does have more than just the CLC. The work that they've been doing is very you can kind of put that into the developer function that we've within the legislation. You can see as part of that mandate for what Build Canada Homes will do in building affordable housing on land. But given that the direction for the mandate is meant to have that financing piece as well, like this is where it comes into CLCL does not have those. Those are not authorities that that they have. They do not have that that kind of financing aspect, and so that's where CLCL would, you know.
So the financing piece is new, I guess. So I guess CMHC obviously is not just an insurance company, but it also did this financing as well. Can you tell me what the disconnect was between the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation and their financing arm, and the CLC and their development arm? What was the disconnect there? Why couldn't they have worked better together? Why do we need Build Canada Homes to create the financing piece?
I would just say that the mandate of Build Canada Homes was meant to really zone in on bringing together those like similar tools that Crown Corporation, CMHC, CLC, they have them in different ways, but trying to focus it in on that affordable housing space, using those tools, pulling in both tools, the land, the flexible financing tools, the partnerships ability, the idea that you could really lean in on the modern methods of construction. I'm like, MMC, hold on. And so I think in trying to pull that together, that was the desire to have that within one entity who could really focus their efforts. And likewise, then allowing CMHC to, you know, zone in on that market housing part of the housing segment, which again is a very large segment and a piece of the puzzle as well when we look at the housing crisis writ large.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all of that. I'll leave you alone now. I will just say again for purposes of my own understanding of this is that I still do struggle, despite your incredibly capable attempts to explain it all. I appreciate that, but I do really struggle with the creation of another corporation. Like I just, you know, I mean, obviously it was a simpler time after the war when it came to dealing with getting homes built. But we created one corporation, and it did a truly phenomenal job. It was amazing what the CMHC did. I've done a speech in the House of Commons on just the scope and the scale of the problem back then, and how the government of the day, a Liberal government no less, recognized the challenge, created the Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation, as it was then called, and created partnerships and worked with builders and, you know, built entire communities, and we solved the housing crisis in, you know, roughly a decade or a little bit less than that. Now its mandate has evolved over time for sure, and you know, it's become more of an insurance agency, I guess, and a research business. But I think, you know, one of the primary challenges to getting homes built and making them all affordable. And of course, this is where we run into the problem with the definition of affordability. But I fundamentally believe that all homes should be more affordable, not just the ones that are below market. We desperately need more investment in social and supportive housing in this country. And I struggle with why we are using up scarce public resources to create a fourth agency or a third corporation at the federal level when bureaucratic delays are actually a major part of the problem with getting homes built and making them all more affordable. And I think that the ambition and the hope behind this thing is completely laudable, and I think it's admirable. But I just don't get it. And I think it's safe to say that a lot of Canadians don't get it either. When we've solved this problem before, and it didn't take three corporations to do it. It was one. And they cut through the noise and just got the job done. And fundamentally, I think that's the problem today. And we've spent a year now, and this thing's still getting up and going. And I really still don't understand why we needed a third Crown corporation when you have two that might have needed more tools, might have needed more power. I think it would have been faster to give them those tools, and we would be 1 year closer to solving this massive housing crisis in this country that is demonstrably worse than it was after the war. And so I think I'll say it again. I applaud the ambition, but I struggle with the the time we spent, in fact, building more bureaucracy. While in fact, one of the primary challenges to getting homes built is in fact bureaucracy. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison, for your passion on this particular subject, which you follow very closely. I have one more speaker, Ms. Goodrich, and then Madame LaLoche.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on some of the questions that were raised by my colleague, Mr. Aitchison. So if Canada Lands Corporation is now going to exist as a subsidiary within Build Canada Homes, does this mean that Canada Lands Corporation is only allowed to build affordable homes now, or are they still allowed to build market homes? Like, how does that structure change? And like, I'm the member of Parliament for Fort McMurray Cold Lake. I'm born and raised in Alberta, born and raised in Fort McMurray. We've had some unique challenges when it comes to building, and have gone through booms and busts and everything in between. But I'm quite familiar with Calgary's Curry Barracks, which is a Canada Lands Corporation space, and it's on the old military base in downtown Calgary. It is very centrally located. It is walking distance to Mount Royal. It's a 15-minute drive to downtown Calgary, which makes it a very desirable neighborhood. There are $1 million homes in that neighborhood because that is the kind of clientele that it has. And there's also affordable housing being built in that area to help with some of those challenges. But my question becomes, like, is this going to mean that going forward, Canada Lands Corporation is only allowed to build affordable homes?
So in the scenario where you have kind of like this direct build model, where you have it being built on federal land, there is a need to have a sustainable model, and so that will require, like in the direct build model, there is a certain percentage of the units which are affordable, but offset as well by having other units which may need to be at market rent, and that is kind of that formula to ensure that into the long term, into perpetuity, you have a model that will allow for affordability to continue of those kind of I'm going to say the non-market units versus needing to have market rent units to be able to like operationally have that model work.
So, forgive my ignorance. Market rent. So, is this not for home ownership, and this is simply building for rental properties and rental spaces?
This is in the direct build model of the six sites that are out there. That is the approach that they have taken with those 6.
So none of the homes being built, none of the units being built are for people to be able to own. This is all for rent. Is that correct?
So Build Canada Homes will, like, they are open to proposals that have, it's not a rental only, but that, again, that would depend on the proposals that come forward.
But is it structured in such a way so that those projects that are for rental, whether they are at market or below market, are the ones prioritized to receive the funding?
So they would expect to see if someone comes in with a proposal. Again, if you've got a non-market community housing provider who's coming in, they would come in and have structured the rents of the units that they were looking to be supporting and operating. They would be structuring that in such a way that they would likely need to have a certain percentage that are market rate in order to offset the depth of affordability that they can achieve on those other units.
I know in talking to a lot of young people across my riding and across Alberta, their dream is still to own a home or own an apartment or own a condo, own a townhouse. They don't want to be in a perpetual state of renting, and it sounds like the plan is to make it so that all of these homes that are being built will put them in a perpetual state of renting. So the affordable space is only going to be for people that aren't able to own. Is that correct?
I think this is a space where you have the different complementary federal tools that would be leaning in on trying to support. Again, you have homeowners who are looking to enter the market and wanting to make sure that we're leaning in on other federal tools that may help those homeowners afford a home and be able to enter into the market in that way as well.
Okay. You've clarified it a little bit. I really appreciate how passionate you are on this subject and how knowledgeable. It's been very useful. I wish, oftentimes when we're studying a bill, we get the legalese of the documentation and then we get a briefing as we're going through clause by clause that gives us the answers that had we had this before we had entered into the study of witnesses, we would have had a better opportunity to be able to put forward amendments and understand exactly where the different pieces are. And it really would have been nice to have heard some of this before we were at this stage, because you're clearly very knowledgeable and very passionate about what you're doing. And so I want to thank you and commend you on that, but just a little bit frustrated that the process kind of happened the way how it did. And we're in a space where we have a limited option to create amendments at this point, even though you're now bringing up some really important things that might have warranted amendments had we had the time to do it beforehand.
Thank you. I have Madame LaRouche. We do have resources to go beyond 10:15, and so I'll continue along unless there's dissent on that. Madame LaRouche? We do 10:45. 10:45. Diesel et 15. Oh, sorry. Diesel et 45. Madame LaRouche.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, with everything we've heard, I'd like to ask Ms. Bolt a couple of questions. Now, based on the information available to us, when the bill will be adopted, there will be a dashboard, a website of some sort where the demands will be made through, and Quebec will have the last word on these projects for those that will be built in Quebec. So I would like to know how you assess that, how you see that. And we've talked about the creation of this new agency quite a bit and the approval of the Ministry of Finance, the whole procedure for Build Canada Homes. But with regard to Quebec, Quebec will have the last word for the projects. How do you see that? Because, of course, it's Quebec's area of jurisdiction. So how do you see that one centralized system, but Quebec will have the last word? Thank you for the question. I'll just hand it over to my colleague, Jeff. Yes, thank you for the question. Now, if we come back to the bill, there isn't anything in the bill which outlines how this portal will work exactly. There will be a memorandum of understanding with the government of Quebec at that point, but the bill remains flexible and lets Build Canada Homes to come into agreements with the provinces by respecting, of course, the conditions that are specific for affordable housing in Quebec. Okay, so it's not in the legislation per se. It doesn't outline the exact functioning of this portal. But if there's one key point that you would like to underline with regard to the flexibility that confirms that Quebec will have the last word, I mean, is there an aspect of the bill, an example where we can clearly see that this flexibility will exist? While the bill authorizes Build Canada Homes to come into agreements with the provinces, and there are clauses outlining this, so there are already examples of such collaboration with regard to the agency in the present situation.
Very good discussion on the various clauses. There are no amendments proposed from clauses 2 to 33. Is there unanimous consent to group them for the vote?
Chair, can I just say, I think one of our shadow minister is going to be returning very imminently here. So I wonder if, just out of respect, we can not make that decision until we have some clarity on that. Okay, well, if you give us maybe a 2-minute suspension, he can confirm what is.
Suspend. I believe Mr. Reynolds has questions. Mr. Reynolds, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for coming today. You had mentioned that there's a developer piece in this, so I'm curious what that looks like. I know when governments build things, it's being in construction myself for many, many years. Cost overruns are run away out of control. Private developers always have a budget and a financial backstop. Government organizations tend not to have those backstops. So I'm just wondering, could you explain the developer piece? Like, does that mean that the government is going to take on a project and hire sub-trades and manage the project, or what does that look like?
So the developer function, so just to kind of clarify the three functions with Build Canada Homes, so there's the financing aspect, there's the developer function, thinking about building on and kind of pulling in that aspect public lands, and then there's the, bringing forward with modern methods of construction, really trying to drive towards that more innovative, productive home building industry. So on that second element, the developer, there is in my mind, it's a spectrum, right? Like there is a way in which with these direct build sites, the Build Canada Homes is really leaning in that aspect that you described, where it's the federal government, managing the development, managing the partnerships that will kind of take place on that federal land. There is a more lighter touch aspects of that, and it kind of comes into there may be opportunities to bring forward partnerships on federal land. There may be opportunities where bringing in the federal land is kind of that key to unlock affordable development for some proponents. And then, of course, there are the elements, recognizing, I think the question had come up previously with this committee around rural communities, for example, and thinking about their capacity to lean in on affordable housing development. So Build Canada Homes, in having that expertise, being able to, offer advice if a community is trying to determine if one of their, parcels of land, if it's appropriate for housing, and really leaning in on trying to provide some of that advice to help its partners also figure out how they may develop affordable housing on public land.
Okay. So does that mean it's going to kind of take on a role of like a general contractor per se, or I don't exactly understand.
So in the cases of the direct build sites that are currently at play, those 6 sites, there have been RFPs issued, requests for proposals that have been issued to, again, bring forward the right folks to help, like the right general contractors and whatnot, to help manage and deliver on those properties. Again, with an emphasis in the case of those 6 on, pulling in and as much factory-built housing as possible. I would say Build Canada Homes, they do have that initial capitalization of $13 billion, and so they will be contemplating as part of that how much of that funding do you lean in on some of the aspects, some of the developer functions where they may be more I'm going to say more active in these direct build pieces versus as well having those, we spoke about the portal a little bit, and having those proposals that come in through the portal that are requesting construction financing. So Build Canada Homes will need to balance the different parts of its function and how that relates back to its capital funding.
Okay. So when a private developer gets a piece of land and says, I'm going to build this 20-story apartment building here, and it's going to be $35 million. I've worked on a lot of projects that were government projects. So a private builder will say this project's going to be $35 million, and ultimately that's a hard stop in the private industry. There are always contingencies for cost overruns, which is built into the initial built into the project, but in my experience on government projects, it's just write checks. Oh, this is going to be extra, that's going to be extra, and I've seen projects nearly double in cost. So what does Build Canada Homes have as those checks and balances built in so that the government isn't taken advantage of, because I have seen that in certain situations from builders and developers, but also to protect the taxpayers' money and keep those projects within the specified budget.
So this is coming back to Build Canada Homes in the transparency and the reporting that it will be required to do on how it is spending that money, that initial capitalization, and they will need to report out. Right now, they are operating as a special operating agency under the Department of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. So similar to how the department needs to report out and report to Parliament on the activities and the expenditures, that provides an opportunity for Build Canada Homes to explain what the costs have looked like for their various activities. In this legislation, it proposes that Build Canada Homes would transition into a Crown Corporation model, and there is a reporting requirement, a reporting framework that aligns with the Crown Corporation model. Happy to get into some of those details, but it would also ensure that there's transparency, that there is an opportunity to, from an audit perspective, from a reporting out, from a transparency to parliamentarians and to Canadians on the activities that Build Canada Homes has undertaken and the associated financial statements and expenditures, that is also shared out.
Is that a hard stop, though? I mean, you can say, okay, this project's $35 million, and now it's 40, and now it's 45. Even though you're reporting it, it isn't really a hard stop. And, I think that's fairly significant. Again, like I mentioned, when you're dealing with a private builder, when the project is getting near that point, the private builder will usually say, okay, well, we're going to make the flooring cheaper. We're going to buy cheaper flooring, or we're going to start making adjustments to stay within that particular project budget. But as I said, on government projects, they don't do that. They just keep writing checks. So I understand the piece about the reporting and the accountability, but a lot of times what happens is they're just report and are accountable to the cost overrun, but there isn't any checks and balances. So, is there anything in there to prevent that from happening? I mean, other than reporting and accountability, to say, okay, this is a hard stop.
Start, and then I think, JS, you might have more to add, but just to say, in this case, a trade-off that Build Canada Homes will need to make is when they think about that $13 billion capital allocation. They will need, there is that trade-off between, okay, so if you are starting to really lean in on this developer side, that is pulling from what is a limited resource and would then not need to be offset with decisions that are being made about construction financing that is being offered. So Build Canada Homes will need to closely monitor the extent to which the different functions are, how each of those kind of buckets, how it comes into play with their operations and their forecast expenditures. But
that was it. Like when in terms of incentives, they will need to manage the envelope that they have with the capitalization that is being provided by that bill or by acts of Parliament. And so they will need to look at the risks and potential benefits of projects and manage portfolio of projects. So they may need to actually make their choices and investment decision based on that. So this is how the model would work.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm good. I cede the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, for the line of questioning, which again was informative. There was no unanimous consent on grouping them, so I'm going to begin calling clause by clause from 2 to 33, as there was no amendments on any of these. So, committee members, shall clause 2 carry? Agreed. On division, clause 2 is carried. Shall clause 3 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 4 carry? On division, carry. Shall clause 5 carry? On division, carry. Shall clause 6 carry? On division, carry. Shall clause 7 carry? On division, carried. Shall clause 8 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 9 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 10 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 11 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 12 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 13 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 14 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 15 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 16 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 17 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 18 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 19 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 20 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 21 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 22 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 23 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 24 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 25 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 26 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 27 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 28 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 29 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 30 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 31 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 32 carry? Carried. On division, you're correct. Shall clause 33, it's just, yeah, what does an amendment? No. Shall clause 33 carry? Ms. Kwan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On clause 33, the NDP is proposing some amendments to it, noting that while Bill C-20 includes the statutory reporting requirement to Parliament, the NDP amendment proposed an annual report to Parliament concerning the Build Canada Home's tangible progress and success towards its statutory purposes. The proposed reporting would require that Parliament receive yearly targets for the upcoming year, as well as progress outcomes measured against the previous year's targets. The metrics for these targets and progress reports would include the number of new units built with Build Canada Home financing, the municipality and province in which they are built, their affordability level, meaning that the dollar amount level of the federal government's, as well as the dollar amount the federal government's contributing, and the number of units created leveraging federal lands and their affordability level. The amendment proposes that the report to Parliament define affordable housing as housing is considered to be affordable if a household's total housing costs do not exceed 30% of its gross income, without prescribing what it should be in the legislation itself. Part 2A of the amendment would require reporting on the type of housing created by population served, i.e. transitional, single-family, seniors, students, etc. Part 2B would add reporting on the use of the federal lands. Part 2C would require that the report use an established baseline and criteria to measure the outcomes. And Part 2D would require that the report indicate the proportion of public and non-market housing in Canada's total housing supply broken down by province, territory, and municipality. And Part 3 requires that the report include national aggregate point-in-time homelessness counts, including regional breakdowns of point-in-time counts, including northern and remote communities, and appendix benchmarking current data against the prior 10 years, an appendix using all of the longitudinal data on the point-in-count counts to establish a forecast of counts 5 years into the future, and disaggregated data on the point-in-count counts insofar as possible by age, gender identity, Indigenous identity, veteran status, and disability status. It would also determine that the national demographics of need based on a definition of core housing need that includes considering affordability, adequacy, and disrepair suitability, including overcrowding and security of tenure. And lastly, that the report would provide a housing insecurity index within the report that tracks overcrowded housing in the territories using a defined threshold and appropriate metrics broken down by territory and including remote communities. Mr. Chair, just to simply say, I think it's really important as this new entity is established that there's transparency, and then also for the Canadian public to know what the targets are and how it is reaching those targets under those various different metrics that I've outlined, and to also have a baseline of measurement. I note also this amendment was crafted in collaboration with the member of Nunavut before she crossed over to the Liberals. Presumably she would have brought this up. Hopefully she would have brought this up with the Liberal caucus, and I hope to see support in this amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. The amendment moved by Ms. Kwan is NDP 1. It is in order. Madame Desrochers on the amendment.
On the amendment, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. And I really want to thank my colleague, Ms. Kwan, for bringing forward this amendment. And I know of all of her work on transparency and accountability. And, you know, those transparency and accountability to the Parliament and to Canadian is a fundamental principle that we do support. However, I want to say Bill Canada Home, like all Crown Corporation, will be subject to strict annual reporting, audit, and transparency requirement under existing law. Under Part 10 of the Financial Management Act, Crown Corporation are required to table corporate plans, which are multi-year plans outlining business activities, investments, mandates, strategic objectives, key initiatives, risk management approach, and expected financial results. Those are very comprehensive documents that are required by law to be provided every year. Summaries of the plans are tabled annually in Parliament, providing forward-looking information on priorities, performance, targets, and resource allocation for parliamentarians and Canadians. Les budgets annuels de fonctionnement et d'immobilisation sont déposés.
The annual operating budgets are also provided, and these detail the activities, the investments, the income, the expenditure, and the main projects and the loans. That is why this is how we're going to ensure transparency, and it's going to take place within the framework of existing legislation. The multi-year plans and the reports are presented to the Parliament. It's already outlined in the legislation, and these are checked by the Auditor General of Canada for accountability and the transparency of the results of these projects. But the objectives of the current amendment are already actually being covered by the current legislation. So Build Canada Homes as a Crown Corporation will have to comply with these rules and regulations, especially transparency and results focused. And our committee, of course, will have its role on that, and that's what Canadians expect, and that's what the legislation already envisages. That is why we're going to be against this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion? I have Ms. Kwan and then Ms. Goodrich.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. If the committee could indulge me for a minute to respond to the government's proposal. I understand that there would be annual reports. However, this specific amendment, I think, is very deliberate in terms of the information being sought, in terms of accountability. And with the overall annual reports, sometimes some of the information is incorporated, oftentimes it isn't. Now, we haven't seen one, so I can't predict, but for certainty, in terms of legislation, in the creation of this new entity, I think it would be important for this amendment to be adopted as part of a parliamentary reporting out to parliamentarians.
I need to spend for a few moments for a health break. Spend. the amendment made by Ms. Kwan, which was NDP 1. Seeing no further discussion. Okay, where are we at? Yep. Shall NDP 1 carry? So NDP 1, the amendment is not carried. Therefore, there's no new clause 33.1. So we'll continue on then with clause by clause. Shall clause 34 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 35 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 36 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 37 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 38 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 39 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 40 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 41 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 42 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 43 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 44 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 45 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 46 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 47 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 48 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 49 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 50 carry? Carried on division. Shall clause 51 carry? Carried on division. Shall the short title carry? Carried on division. Shall the title carry? And there was no amendments, right?
You just say, shall the bill
Yeah. Shall the bill carry? Sure. Okay, clerk, a recorded vote on the bill.
Madame Koutakis.
Oui.
Madame Desrochers.
Oui.
Mr. Chang.
Oui.
Ms. Fancy.
Yes.
Ms. Harrison.
Yes.
Monsieur Joseph.
Oui.
Mr. Jennis.
No.
Ms. Goodridge.
No.
Mr. Reynolds.
No.
Mr. Aitchison.
No.
Madame Larouche.
Oui.
Oui. Yeas pour 7-7, nays compte 4-4.
So the bill is carried and shall, and I'll report the bill to the House.
You have to ask.
Sure. Shall the chair report the bill to the House? On division, the chair will report the bill to the House on division. That, committee members, concludes today's meeting. Our next meeting will be on Monday, May the 4th. And nothing has changed here. We'll resume our study on the temporary foreign worker program.
No, they just agreed on 20.
Oh, yes, that's right. Okay, sorry. We will resume based on the agreement of the motion of Madame Desrochers.
Just share on that motion. Do you have everything you need in terms of the youth report? Do we need to choose a title or something? I don't think we have to, but that was.
No, we're
good.
V2 is ready to be adopted by the committee.
Okay. I mean, it was adopted, right? So we're.
No, V2 was not.
It was part of.
Was it part of the? Okay,
Yeah,
fine. Yeah, okay. My analysts are not here. Yeah, they're giving me a thumbs up.
They're giving you a thumbs up.
Okay, we're good? Okay, with that, is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Adjourn.
So, the motion of Madame Desrochers.
So that you just adjust the calendar?
Yeah, but I can't adjust the calendar for right now.
No, whenever you do.
No, but so the problem that we're having is.